Hello Internet, I'm Jaden and welcome back to the Upkill devlog series. The last video got over 150 views at the time of this recording and I am so grateful. Thank you so much for checking out the development of my dream game, and if you'd like to stay up to date and support the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. In today's devlog, things might look like they've taken a bit of a step back, and there's actually a really good reason for this. Whilst it was great to make some pixel art in the last episode to get the overall look and feel of the game, I wanted to strip the game back to its core, and the reason? Game design. Game design can look like a lot of things, but my personal approach is: Step 1. Who and where. I like to develop characters and the basic plot first. This may seem a bit backwards, but at the end of the day, I want the players of my game to feel an attachment to the characters and to want to play in order to progress the plot or story. It doesn't have to be like a Game of Thrones level novel, but it should at least explain the why. Why is the character doing what they are doing? Why do they need to reach the end goal? This is in the hopes that the why becomes adopted by the player and it becomes a shared goal. Step 2. What? What is the core gameplay loop? Or how does the player interpret the core mechanic of the game? We know the who and the why, but what is the what of the game? What do you need to do in order to reach the end goal? Do you need to constantly run to the right of the screen like a classic Mario? Or do you need to go down an endless well like Downwell? That's a great game, by the way, check it out. Step 3. How. Once you know the what, the next stage is to then work out how to convey this what as simply as possible. I'd like to focus on having as little tutorials and written text as possible. You don't want the start of the game to feel like the instructions to cooking a 5-course meal. You could break up the core components of the gameplay loop and slowly introduce them over a series of several levels. You could have NPC characters dotted along the way to talk you through attaining new abilities. But my personal favorite is the Mario approach. Mario starts out on the left-hand side of the screen with a large void to the right. Curiosity takes over and you move right to explore further. If you change your mind and decide to go back to the left, you learn that the screen can only move in the right direction, not allowing any backtracking. A Goomba is presented to the player very early on so that the player is familiar with this type of enemy. If they do hit the enemy, they respawn and only lose a couple of seconds of progress. The question block purposefully has a question mark, begging the question, what is this? Even better, if you attempt to jump over the Goomba, you hit your head on the blocks, and the blocks show a little animation that jumping into these blocks is something you actually want to do and is encouraged. When the power-up mushroom spawns, it goes to the right, giving you a chance to catch it. But if you miss it, it rebounds off the pipe, making its way back, giving you another opportunity to capture. Step 4 is when. This last core step is all about concentrating on the game's controls, making controlling the character as immersive and responsive as possible, making sure that when you press an input, the corresponding action happens when expected and how expected. I know the term when is a little bit of a stretch, but controls can make or break a game, and more often than not, it is because the action on screen doesn't occur when or how you think it should. Okay, let's get back to Upkill. I've spent a lot of time focusing on step 4 recently, and to focus on step 4, sometimes it's easier to remove all graphics and work with squares. The reason for this is that if moving a square around the screen is fun, then you are onto something. There are a few little tricks I've implemented into the control system for the player that have made controlling the character feel a lot more responsive and enjoyable. The biggest being jumping. Jumping is a core function of platformers. It's usually how you traverse the vertical height in the levels, and so a large portion of the game will be spent jumping. The funny thing with jumping though, is that as you don't want to jump as soon as the player presses the jump button. Now this may seem a bit counterintuitive, but let me explain. Jump buffering and coyote time. Let's start with jump buffering. The player isn't going to have lightning fast, pixel perfect reflexes. And even if they do, and you design your game around that, you are severely impacting the accessibility of your game. So let's say the player presses the jump button just before they hit the ground. The code would report that the character isn't currently on the ground and so doesn't jump. But to the player, the character did look like it was on the ground. They just hit the jump button a few frames early. This can make the controls feel unresponsive and frustrating. So how do we fix this? We register that jump as a desired action or a jump buffer. If the character is very close to the ground but isn't quite there yet, and the player pressed the jump button, store that action as a desired action to action it when the character actually touches the ground and can jump. Jesus, I said action a lot then. These few frames of leniency end up making the character feeling much more responsive and makes the player feel like they are truly in control of what is occurring on the screen, even if they aren't. Speaking of frames of leniency, Coyote Time. It's a weird name for a platformer must-have. Rather than the player pressing the jump button just before they need to, what if they pressed it just after they needed to? What if the character was running off of a platform and has just left the ground when the player pressed the jump button? The character wouldn't jump, but the speed of the character can often make it hard for our human brains to interpret when we should actually press the jump button. This is where Coyote Time kicks in. Just after the character leaves the platform, a timer starts counting down. If the player presses the jump button whilst the timer is still counting down, a jump will occur. This gives the player a few frames of leniency when running straight off the end of a platform to jump onto the next. Coyote Time and jump buffering are simple things to implement that may not make much sense in terms of realism, but add a metric crap ton for the overall responsiveness of the game. Moving on. I've rewritten the zombie AI from the ground up to implement a state machine based approach. This might be something I delve deeper to in another devlog, but essentially the zombies can only be one of a certain number of states. For example, chase, idle, walk, etc. A state machine handles the switching between these states based on various factors, like if the zombie can actually see the player, etc. The end result of this is having a zombie AI that feels much more fun and emerging than a simple running back and forth AI. I've also done some more work on the arena mechanics. Instead of just closing the doors if there is zombies and player in the arena will now close the doors when the player walks in and start a wave-based spawning system. This system is very flexible, allowing for customizations of how many waves, what types of zombies can spawn in those waves, using the object variables function of GameMaker. This will allow me to quickly create levels with multiple arenas and change how they work in the level editor. If you've made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. It really helps me out a bunch, and I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.